What are some things your run-of-the-mill online Orthodox apologists probably won't tell you about Eastern Orthodoxy? Stick around to find out.
You're watching Reason and Theology Live, a show dedicated to charitable discussions, debates, interviews, commentary, and analysis. The show concentrates on theological topics, historical matters, and philosophical problems with content ranging from introductory material to in-depth examinations. And now, your host, Michael Lofton.
Hey, welcome back to Reason and Theology. Your host, Michael, doing a short show here. Wanted to just play a couple clips from a interview that took place recently that I found to be very interesting because it gives us some insight into some questions that are taking place in Eastern Orthodoxy that generally Orthodox online apologists won't tell you about, unfortunately. However, they will mention that Catholics have this and that problem in the Catholic Church, but again, when it comes to being consistent and addressing some of the same or similar issues in their own communion, online Orthodox apologists tend to not mention these things. So there seems to be a double standard. Let me share my screen and give you an example. This is from a conversation that took place recently between Dr. Larry Chapp and Dr. David Bentley Hart. I've had both of these gentlemen on the show. Dr. Chapp mentions here in the video that he's recently come out as a Universalist. And of course, it's no secret that David Bentley Hart has been a Universalist for a while now. So they're having a conversation about Universalism, and there's some really interesting comment that Hart makes about Catholic and Orthodox bishops on this topic that you generally won't hear, again, from online Orthodox apologists. So I appreciate how candid Dr. Hart is being here. Again, I think it's a little bit more transparent than some online folks tend to be. And by the way, there's another section, I'll probably play it after this part, but there's another section where they're talking about the resurrection that I found to be really, really interesting, because long story short, it seems that Hart believes that flesh and bone will not actually be resurrected, but the thing that is going to be resurrected is spiritual, but spiritual here is understood to still be material. So it's a material resurrection, but it's spiritual. Again, however, spirit doesn't necessarily mean not material for Hart, but it does mean not flesh and bone. And he's basing that on a reading of St. Paul, where he talks about how flesh and bone will not inherit the kingdom of heaven. He interprets that to mean that literally that which is going to be resurrected is not going to be flesh and bone, but is going to be a spiritual resurrection. And of course, this is going to be based on a reading of 1 Corinthians 15. I'm not saying I agree with any of it, but that's where he's going to appeal to. But again, he's going to say that the spiritual resurrection, it's not amaterial, it's still material, but it's just not flesh and bone kind of material. So very interesting discussion there on the resurrection. I'll leave it for you to decide the orthodoxy of that part of the interview. So certainly check it out. But let's just go to the part where they're talking about universalism. And again, Dr. Hart is very candid and will tell you something that you probably aren't going to hear a whole lot from online Orthodox apologists. However, it is something that I've mentioned before. Okay, let's see here. Share my screen. All right, enable audio. You should see it now. All right, we're going to start around the 12-minute and 52-second mark and play it for about 30 seconds. The relevant clip is relatively short, although you should certainly go and listen to the whole discussion, listen to it in context, but I'm certainly not ripping anything out of context here. I'm just highlighting the part that I want you to focus on. All right, so again, right around 12-minute, 52-second mark, let's hear what they have to say.
That he is on this case, so to speak, and it does underscore the fact, because I've gotten tons of rather negative emails since I sort of came out of the closet as a Universalist in my interview with Jordan Wood,
And again, when somebody originally shared this video, I think it was Eric on his Facebook, if I'm not mistaken, and he mentioned that. I thought, wait, I didn't know that Dr. Chap maintained universalism, and surely there's a misunderstanding. So I watched the video, and no, he's very explicit here that he maintains universalism. So I have not watched the other video that he references here just yet, but I have watched this one, and again found it to be very, very interesting.
Since I sort of came out of the closet as a universalist in my interview with Jordan Wood.
And by the way, Dr. Chap does say that, it sounds like he's saying he's not denying the dogmatic tradition of the church, but he would just argue that there isn't a definitive settlement on the matter from what it sounds like. I think that's his view. I'm very interested in hearing more on how his view interacts with, say, Lateran 4, and why Lateran 4's profession of faith is not definitive. I'd love to hear more about that. Perhaps he's done some videos on it, but I do want to mention that, because it doesn't sound like he's saying he rejects any definitive teachings. He's just going to say that this hasn't been definitively taught. That's at least how I understand Dr. Chap's position. I'm not saying I agree with that. I'm just trying to fairly represent his perspective.
And saying, how can you do that and be a faithful Catholic and so on? I really do think the verdict is not out.
Right, there you go. So it sounds like he thinks that, again, there's nothing definitive here on part of the Catholic magisterium that would exclude universalism. And he's not just talking about the Balthazar kind of dare we hope kind of stuff. He's actually saying real, like, full-blown universalism, everyone's going to be saved kind of thing. And he also does mention later on in the interview that he believes Balthazar was an undercover or a closet universalist, which I know that there are plenty of people who would defend Balthazar's position who would vehemently oppose that view and say he was not a closet universalist. But again, that's just his perspective. Not saying I agree with it.
As a universalist in my interview with Jordan Wood, and saying, how can you do that and be a faithful Catholic and so on? I really do think the verdict is not out.
Here we go.
Another set of names I daren't name are a lot of bishops and priests of both the Catholic and the Orthodox world who have told me in private, but alas, every single one of them said, but of course, I can't say it openly, of course, scandalized.
All right, so let's hear that again. He is saying that Hart is saying he knows many Catholic bishops and many Orthodox bishops who maintain universalism. They just can't say it openly because it would cause scandal. Now, I've mentioned this before, and I think that there's been quite a few people have already talked about how some Catholic bishops already maintain this. But I've mentioned the fact that, some Orthodox will criticize Catholics there, and they'll criticize maybe Assisi and what they claim to be syncretism and relativism and universalism. They'll criticize these things, but then it will be pointed out that there are some concerns in Eastern Orthodoxy where you do have universalism pretty prevalent in some quarters of Eastern Orthodoxy. Not everybody who's Orthodox maintains it, but there's some quarters. And again, as Dr. Hart is saying, it's not just the liberal ones. It's not just the liberal ones. It's actually conservative bishops that maintain this, Catholic and Orthodox. So listen again.
Wood, and saying, how can you do that and be a faithful Catholic and so on? I really do think the verdict is not out.
Another set of names I daren't name are a lot of bishops and priests of both the Catholic and the Orthodox world who have told me in private, but alas, every single one of them said, but of course, I can't say it openly, of course, scandalized. I think many Catholics would be, and I'm not talking just about the liberal.
Yeah, here we go, because there's already somebody in the chat saying we already know this. Many uber liberal Orthodox priests, etc. No, he's explicitly saying it's not just the liberal ones, and that's true. It's not just liberal ones.
Woke Catholic clergy that the new manualists hate so much. There's quite a lot of very, very Orthodox, very traditional Catholic clergy
So here he's speaking about traditional Catholic clergy, not just liberal ones, but also traditional ones. But notice this was also in the context of Eastern Orthodox clergy. Listen to it one more time.
Universalist in my interview with Jordan Wood, and saying, how can you do that and be a faithful Catholic and so on? I really do think the verdict is not out.
And another set of names I daren't name are a lot of bishops and priests of both the Catholic and the Orthodox world who have told me in private, but alas,
Catholic and Orthodox world.
Every single one of them said, but of course, I can't say it openly, of course, scandalize. I think many Catholics would be, and I'm not talking just about the liberal, woke Catholic clergy that the new manualists hate so much. There are quite a lot of very, very Orthodox, very traditional Catholic clergy.
Unless somebody tried to just automatically dismiss Hart as some kind of liberal, keep in mind he's in good standing with his bishop. He has not been excommunicated. Now, some will say, but you got Father James Martin who hasn't been excommunicated. He's in good standing. Right. And so that's why you can't point out cases like Father James Martin if you're going to be an online Orthodox apologist without then mentioning similar versions of such problems that you find in Eastern Orthodoxy.
Are in fact either Balthasarian or full
Right.
Universalist, which I think we already knew, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think Balthasar himself was probably a closet Universalist too.
Yeah.
There's the comment. I know that there's plenty of people who would defend Balthasar's thesis and say, no, he was not probably a closet Universalist. I know Dr. DeClue would certainly take issue with that. I imagine even Bishop Barron would take a issue with that. But hey, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Bishop Barron would agree with Dr. Chap. Don't know. Don't want to speak for Bishop Barron because I certainly can't. But I don't know if I don't know if he would go that far. But I would certainly be curious to hear his commentary here. Now, what I found to be interesting also, kind of on a different note here, a side note, was again the discussion about the resurrection. It took place around 1 hour, 5 minutes. Let's listen for about 4 minutes. There is a little issue with their audio. So it's not my audio, it's theirs, and we're gonna have to stop around 1 hour, 9 minutes because the audio gets really, really bad, but you're going to get the full effect of it at that point. But here's where you're going to hear Hart talking about the resurrection being spiritual, not spiritual in the sense that not material, but spiritual, yes, understood materially, some form of matter, but not fleshly, not a fleshly resurrection, not flesh and bone. He wants to indicate that, or he says that St. Paul actually rejects that position. Again, I'm not here to defend 1 Corinthians 15's proper understanding. Perhaps we can do that another time. But I just want to call your attention to that discussion that I found to be very interesting. And once again, I'll leave it to you, Catholic and Orthodox viewers, to decide whether or not that position is Orthodox or really if it is effectively a form of Gnosticism, which is something that they're also talking about in this context. So certainly go and listen to also the discussion that they had about Gnosticism itself. All right, let's start around, like I said, 105:20.
His philosophy, I doubt it was universally held, although I do believe it's echoed, say, in the language about the resurrection, living like the angels. But put that aside, we only have Paul, and Paul clearly denies that the resurrection is the salvation of the flesh. He flatly states that flesh and blood cannot be saved. They are by their nature elements of mortality. They're part of our imprisonment and death.
So whatever the resurrection is for Hart, it's not one of flesh and blood. He's not saying it's non-material. He's going to clarify that in a moment. He's not saying it's not material, but he's saying it's not flesh and blood.
So when we abominate the Gnostics for for their their anti-corporealism, which isn't what it is, but their rejection of the flesh.
He's talking here about the Gnostics. Some, criticize the Gnostics for their rejection of, the goodness of matter and the resurrection of the flesh.
Anti-corporealism, which isn't what it is, but their rejection of the flesh. We would have to include Paul in those animate versions.
Is his rejection of flesh a rejection of materiality as such, or just Sartre?
I mean,
see, again, he's careful to note he's not denying a material resurrection. Again, lest somebody immediately jump to the conclusion that he's just saying it's entirely spiritual, it's some phantom ghost or something. No, he is saying it's material.
Again, what does matter? They thought there were different kinds of it. They thought above the moon there are realms of ether, which is a rarefied, but it's actually spirit is in many ways something stronger, mightier, more substantial than flesh, even though it can do miraculous things like enter rooms when the doors are locked, appear and disappear. Nonetheless, it's imperishable, it's indestructible. It can also do physical things like eat fish or break bread and then disappear. It would not have been, it wouldn't have thought, again, don't think like a Cartesian. Don't think it's either like materiality means solid, inert, mechanical, dead matter. There was no such concept. As opposed to a sort of purely disincarnate, utterly incorporeal kind of something less than a vapor.
Right. Well, and I agree with that. I was reacting to your comparison of Paul with the Gnostics, and that they, in a sense, both rejects the idea that the flesh will sort of be resurrected.
And the Gnostics, I would point out the so-called, the Valentinians, the Sethians, from what we can tell, they have this notion of a spiritual body. They're being set free from the flesh and blood. They will receive
I maybe I'm misunderstanding him, but it sounds like he's in agreement with that aspect of some Gnostics. But again, maybe I'm misunderstanding him.
Spiritual body, which becomes the ohima, the vehicle by which they're able to enter into the heavenly places, which, by the way, is what Paul says. He speaks of the distance that separates us from God. He thinks of it both as spiritual, but also in a sense cosmic. That nothing now,
would Paul that
height or depth can separate us from God.
I don't want to spend all of our last minutes here on this topic, but would Paul then have considered our bodies to be a tomb for the soul, something that we simply have to escape? That materiality. Go ahead.
I believe that he thought that the body of flesh and blood is the outer man, and when he talks about the outer man and the inner man, that's literally what he means. He means the outer man is a kind of prison of death, from which we need to be liberated. That's what the resurrection of Christ, that's why we're entering into Christ's resurrection, is that the outer man can be shed, meaning literally the body of flesh and blood.
So he's saying the body of flesh and blood, according to Paul, should be shed, and he's saying that's the outer man for Paul. He's contrasting it then with Paul's usage of the inner man being that is not this outer man, this not flesh and blood. That's something that we have to escape. That's something that we have to shed and get rid of.
And receive a new spiritual body along with Christ in his resurrection and enter into the heavenly places. And I think he felt as he was much more Platonic in that sense.
This is where the audio breaks up, but yeah, here's Logos. I agree with you. He says he's confusing concupiscence with matter. That's my understanding as well. But certainly Dr. Hart has heard that pushback before and is going to have his response to it. So he's not reading Paul that way. Again, I'll leave it to you to determine the orthodoxy of that segment, but I think that you should certainly listen to it. But bringing it back here full circle, I just kind of wonder, again, this question of universalism that we see very popular in some quarters of Eastern Orthodoxy, not everywhere, but some quarters of Eastern Orthodoxy, among not just liberal Orthodox, but conservative Orthodox bishops and priests. I just wonder why we don't hear online Orthodox apologists hold some of their bishops and priests to the same standard that they hold some Catholic bishops and priests. Whenever they criticize various aspects of, views that they find among some Catholics, I just wish that they would be consistent and do so with their own. Here with Reason and Theology, I'm pretty consistent across the board. I'll criticize some Eastern Orthodox, and then I will go and criticize some Catholics for the exact same thing. And I just wish that online Orthodox apologists were also consistent here and did the same thing and wouldn't just use these arguments against Catholics, but then not apply those same weights to their own clergy. Scripture talks about unequal measures, unequal weights. It's an abomination. It's bad for us, but then whenever they have the problem, it's not bad for them. It's a double standard. Well, that's again, according to Scripture, an abomination because it's being unfair. It's using unequal weights or measures. It's being dishonest. So I would like to see them, and I'm calling them to honesty, to maybe consistently apply some of these arguments to individuals in their own circles. I'll bring this to your attention so that you will now be aware of it. So the next time you hear an online Orthodox apologist trying to slam and dunk on Catholics for this or that problem, you can say, well, you actually have this same problem with this and that person. And how do you handle that? Does that somehow invalidate the claims of Eastern Orthodoxy? Ask those kinds of questions. Anyways, appreciate y'all watching. That's going to do it. Like I said, just a short show here for today, but certainly go and check the rest of the interview out. Very fascinating discussion. Not saying I agree with it, but again, fascinating discussion. It's called David Bentley Hart, interviewed by Larry Chapp. It was just recently put on Dr. Chapp's channel. Alrighty, that's going to do it, y'all. I'll see you later. God bless. Oh, wait, before you go, I would really appreciate it if you would consider supporting this channel. This is my primary means to provide for my family, and it also helps me to produce content like this video. If you would like to support me, become a patron by visiting patreon.com/Reason and Theology. You'll also get access to extra exclusive content when you become a patron. Lastly, hit that like button and the subscribe button, and be sure to leave a comment down below. God bless.